Welcome to the Rewilded Human Podcast, where Dr. Lucille, holistic psychiatrist and psychotherapist, and Dr. Lynn, naturopath and nutritional consultant, help you reconnect with your true self through practical tips on mental health, nutrition, exercise, relationships, and spirituality. With a dash of humor, they tackle today's toughest issues to guide you back to a harmonious, vibrant life. Rediscover your natural self, just as nature intended.
So we all know that heart disease is one of the number one issues in our world. We also know that there are certain things about the heart that are universally true, right? Like, oh, it's a pump, and certain conditions predispose us to getting heart disease, like high blood pressure and diabetes and, oh, those awful cholesterols. And we know that there's certain dietary things that we must do, and there are certain blood tests that we need to determine whether we're sitting duck for heart disease, and on it goes, right? We all know this. Well, what if it really wasn't true? So today on the Rewilded Human Podcast, Dr. Lynn and I had the thrill of interviewing Dr. Stephen Hussey, who's a chiropractor and an all-around expert on the latest greatest research about the truth about heart disease and heart health. He comes by his wisdom very honestly because as a child, he had a number of chronic conditions that he was told would predispose him to having a heart attack in the future. So he started researching everything about the heart. He was curious. He wanted to learn everything. In his learnings, he found ways to actually heal himself of a lot of the pre-existing conditions he had that actually put him at risk for a heart attack. However, when he was 34, he had a massive heart attack, and nobody could really explain why. But again, he went to work researching and figuring it out, and he was able to reverse all the signs of damage to his heart, and he is now in optimal health. How did he do it? Well, in this episode, you're going to learn things like the heart is not really a pump. There are other amazing things that the heart does that you can actually help your heart get stronger and to live longer by applying certain basic quantumbiology principles like circadian reset, proper use of hydration, use of red light therapy, magnetism or grounding, all of which Dr. Hussey used on himself and went against the common medical advice and ended up in peak physical condition. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this fascinating journey into the truth about our hearts.
Dr. Hussey, welcome to our podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Dr. Lucille and I are huge fans. We have listened to probably every single episode where you've been, every podcast you've been on, every episode you've been on, and we can't wait to pick your brain. But first of all, let's start with your story because you have an amazing story. What happened to you when you were 34 years old? Can we start there at the very beginning?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
So I mean, my traditional, training or background, like what I do is I'm a chiropractor and I also have a master's in functional medicine. I like to say that those degrees didn't really teach me anything, like what I know now. They just kind of gave me a baseline education of what we think we know about stuff. But yeah, I was always interested in health because my childhood was kind of full of, chronic illnesses, unfortunately. It wasn't like I was just like this terribly sick kid, but I just had these ailments. I had lots of inflammatory type things. I used to break out in hives all over my body. I had asthma, I had terrible allergies. Had IBS, and ultimately ended up with type 1 diabetes at the age of 9. And so my entire childhood and young adulthood at the doctor's office, at the endocrinologist's office, I was always told that heavily predisposed me to heart disease, being type 1. And I always ask why, and they say, oh, it damages small blood vessels and stuff like that. So I guess I was kind of forced into being curious about heart disease. And as I grew up, I decided I wanted to go into some form of medicine. But in college, I started living my life differently and noticed the way that I changed my life. My lifestyle had a direct impact on my ability to manage these conditions or get rid of them. I got rid of most of them aside from type 1 diabetes. And I thought it was interesting that no doctor told me that I could do that. So that kind of got my wheels turning as far as like, I also had a very, influential girlfriend at the time who was also pushing me that direction as well. Like, hey, medicine's not really helping you, that kind of thing, from a chronic disease perspective. So I started going down that path and decided to be a chiropractor and all that stuff, but always, had an interest in the heart and heart disease. And so tried to learn as much as I could. And I, looked at a lot of different things, and a lot of different things that were different than what Western medicine and even my education as a chiropractor was telling me about the physiology, and the pathology of the heart. And so I just kind of, looked for stuff when I could find it, and was feeling pretty good and feeling healthy. I'd always try and control things through diet and exercise, and that had kept me pretty healthy for most of my life. And then, at the age of 34, totally unexpected, heart testing was normal, CAC was normal 6 months prior to this. And then I had a widowmaker heart attack on January 5th, 2021, totally out of the blue. There's lots of details about that story and what happened and why I think it happened and everything. But just for the sake of brevity, like, in the hospital, I got what I would call very bad advice based on previous knowledge that I knew, but also just logic, in my opinion. Just very bad advice about, I was at their mercy. I was like, hey, so what happened? Like, tell me what happened. And the broken record answer I got was, your cholesterol is high, or cholesterol causes this, or whatever. There was nothing else. And the worst part about all of it was that when I would try and ask questions and inquire about things, not in an abrasive way or anything, but just to ask questions, ask their opinion, it was like a shutdown of conversation. It was like, this is your option. If you don't do this, you're going to have another heart attack. You're going to have heart failure. Do this. And I, knew of other information, and I didn't know as much as I know now, not near as much as I know now, but I knew enough to doubt that was going to really keep me healthy. So I went home and I did my own heart healing routine. And in 3 months, I got an echocardiogram again, and the damage that happened to my heart was gone, or it healed. And that likely would have improved some without doing what I did. But they assumed it was the medications, and I wasn't taking any medications.
Can you
I
tell us
decided
a little
not
bit
to.
about what you were doing in those 3
Yeah,
months?
so I took a blood thinner for 6 months because there was a stent in there, and that increases risk of clotting. So I took that for 6 months until it incorporated itself into the artery wall. But the main things that I changed, the only things that I changed were I got a lot more sunlight, did a lot more grounding. I set my circadian rhythm, and I bought an infrared sauna. And so those are the things that I did mainly. I took a few supplements for about a year after the heart attack, but then I stopped taking them after that. So I took like taurine, and I took wabine, or strophanthus. It's got two names, and I took serapeptase, and magnesium, and that's pretty much it. But I don't take those now. But anyways, so my heart recovered. The ejection fraction returned to normal because it had dropped, and the tissue of the heart had healed and was conducting the signal of a heart contraction normally again after 3 months. And then right about that time, I started exercising more again, getting back into my exercise routine. And I noticed that there was pain in my lower right leg, from the knee down. And so at first I couldn't figure out what it was, but every time I would exercise, even walk fast at the airport, it was just pain in my leg to the point where like it would never stop me, but it was uncomfortable. And so eventually I got around, maybe it was 6 months after the heart attack now, I had an ultrasound done, and I had developed plaque in my femoral artery in my thigh that was restricting blood flow to my lower leg. And the only thing I can think that caused that was the intervention they did for the heart attack, because they went into the femoral artery on that side. Because the morning I had the heart attack, I did a sprint workout and my leg was just fine. Like there was no pain in my leg or anything. And then on the side that they did it, and I also found some evidence that the device they use to seal the artery after they do that can cause changes down the leg, right, peripherally. So that's what I think it was. But anyways, I developed this 75 to 99% blockage of plaque in my femoral artery, and it was restricting blood flow. But the vascular surgeon at the time said, well, let's not do anything, because we start messing with them, they get worse. And right now it's not allowing you to do some things you like, but you can do your day-to-day activities just fine. And I said, okay. So I kept doing my thing. I kept doing that healing routine, except I kind of intensified it at this point. I started really prioritizing those things I listed before and making them like an everyday thing. And a year later, I went back and the plaque was only 50% blocking the artery. And they didn't believe it, actually. They did the test twice because they were like, we don't see this happen. Literally, the vascular surgeon's words, like, we can't say it's better because we don't see these things get better. And I said, well, you just did the test twice and it showed the same thing, like that it's improved. And so then I kept doing everything that I was doing. And a year later, I came back and my artery was normal in my leg. So, and then a year after that, I came back for a follow-up and it was still normal. So I reversed plaque in my leg, which they told me was impossible. And if you look at the literature, like peripheral artery disease, which is what that is usually type 1 diabetics have a worse outcome with that than type 2 diabetics even, which is interesting to me. I don't know why that is exactly, but that's what the literature shows. And I reversed it completely. And so the vascular surgeon was like, well, I guess you don't have to come back. And I was just like, well, why don't you ask me like what I did? And maybe we could figure out why this happened and you could help other people do that, but there was no curiosity or anything. So anyways, then like just this last February, I got imaging of my heart arteries. I got a CT angiogram, and then I did an analysis through Clearly, and my arteries are clean. There's a very small amount of plaque in my right coronary artery that was there at the time of the heart attack, so that hasn't progressed. And the rest of my arteries are clean. The stent is open. There's no plaque anywhere. What I'm doing is working. And I'll say that I did this with LDL levels well above what they think is normal, or what they say it should be. I reversed this. Now, I was high before I had the heart attack. So people say, oh, see, look, your LDL was high. That's what caused your heart attack. It's like, well, I also completely reversed plaque and have completely clean arteries with these levels, sometimes 300 or 400, my LDL levels, not total cholesterol, LDL, because I know why that is, which we can talk about if you want to. But yeah, so it's just, my story is just an end of one, anecdote, but it shows that many parts of my story show that the conventional thinking about heart disease don't quite match up. And they fly. I can't tell you how many people on social media, like doctors, have said, this is impossible. You haven't done this. And I say, I posted my results there. I posted them on this date, and they go, and I don't hear from them again. So it's just this thinking in medicine that this isn't possible. I'm like, well, what if it is? What if you're just doing the wrong things? What if you're just been taught that it's not possible? So it's a story I'm trying to share so people can make better informed health decisions.
I love your story.
Can I just clarify something? Are you still a diabetic?
Yeah, I'm still type 1 diabetic. And I think, there are people that tell me I could reverse it. I don't know, unless they come up with some stem cell therapy, or I do something to induce stem cell production substantially and stop the process of killing beta cells in my body, and then it slowly recovers. I don't know. There's so many different types of type 1 diabetes nowadays. There used to be just kind of one that we mainly saw, which is juvenile, diagnosed at a young age. But now there's one people getting it as an adult, like LADA. There's like various types of MODI, and every type 1 I've ever worked with, we're all different. Like how we control it is totally different. The amounts of insulin we use, the diet we eat, like we find what works for us, and there are much better ways than what medicine says to do it. But we're all a little different as far as how much control we can get and the mechanisms we use to control it. It's interesting.
And Dr. Hussey, looking back at what happened to you, what would you say caused the heart attack?
So, is it okay if it's a long answer?
Of course, we have all the time in the world. Absolutely.
So from my perspective, based on everything I've looked at, there's two main mechanisms of heart attacks, and neither one of them are the ones that what medicine tells you it is. Medicine will tell us that, plaque will either slowly grow and create this stenosis or narrowing of an artery and eventually close it up enough to create lack of blood flow, which is angina. That's why they do a stress test to see if they can push enough blood through there. And if they can't, you'll get symptoms, which I don't think is what's causing the symptoms. Or they'll say some of that plaque is soft plaque and it's unstable and it'll rupture, and that'll cause a clotting response and it'll block the artery instantaneously. And I don't think either of those things is true. And I say that based on the work of Giorgio Beraldi, who was a scientist who studied the coronary arteries his entire career. And as far as I know, because I've met a lot of cardiologists, and I always ask them if they know who he is, and nobody knows who he is, which is crazy to me. He's written books, he's written papers, but anyways, his work showed that the anytime an artery gets to about 60 or 70% narrowed, that the body builds collaterals around it, like collateral circulation, builds other arteries. And cardiologists know about collateral circulation; they see it all the time, but but his work showed that it happens every single time. It's not just sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't. Or an artery from a different, or yeah, a new artery from a different artery over here will grow over and supply the area that's not getting it from this artery. It's not just arteries that go around the blockage. So anyways, that happens all the time. So that information right there tells us why, if you look at the research on elective stent placement, so they're placing stents when there's no heart attack happening to prevent a heart attack. That's what they're placing the stent for, or bypass surgeries. They don't prevent heart attacks. Like, you do those procedures, whether or not you have them or not, the literature is very clear. Those procedures don't prevent future heart attacks because the body's already figured that out, right? It's already built the bypass itself. And so building another bypass is not really going to help anything. You're not addressing why heart attacks happen. Same with stents. If you open up the artery that's already been bypassed by the body, it's not really going to help anything. But sometimes those procedures do relieve symptoms, which is interesting. So that can be helpful for somebody, but they don't prevent future heart attacks. So in that situation, with learning that information, then it tells us that what would happen that would cause a heart attack would be an acute blockage, something that happens instantaneously, where there's not enough time for collaterals to form. And collaterals, I've found literature in animal models that collaterals can form within 4 to 7 days and fully compensate the heart with blood. So very quickly, but if it happens instantaneously, the collaterals can't form. So that can block the artery acutely, and we lack blood flow. So we should be looking at acute thrombosis and not these gradual stenosis. We shouldn't be focusing on the lesion, the stenosis, and trying to treat that. We should be promoting or decreasing thrombosis promoting risk factors, which there's a very good paper called The Myth of the Vulnerable Plaque that, again, I've yet to meet a cardiologist who's aware of this paper, who's read it. I'm not saying that there's none of them, but I haven't met one. And this article, because the other argument is that a plaque ruptures and that causes a heart attack. Yes. But this article reviews all the evidence for that theory and basically concludes that plaque ruptures happen all the time, but they don't cause heart attacks. Like a plaque can rupture and that can lead to more plaque development stacking up on itself and more stenosis, but it doesn't create this clot. Their number was 0.06% of the time does a plaque rupture cause a heart attack. So a very, very low amount of time. So again, trying to treat the stenosis with a stent or a bypass to prevent a plaque rupture is not going to help if that doesn't cause heart attacks. Mm-hmm. So again, we should be focusing on preventing clotting. And that's exactly what the authors of that Myth of the Vulnerable Plaque study concluded, that we should be focusing on thrombosis promoting risk factors, which means we should be keeping the blood thin. We should be staying hydrated. We should be keeping the blood moving. And I think that the ways that we do that are very different than what medicine should suggest. So that's one mechanism of what could cause a heart attack. And it could have been what happened for me. And we'll get back to that. But I don't know, because there's a whole nother mechanism of heart attacks, and which again, I don't think is well understood by modern medicine, but it's been very well described in different literature, including my book and Dr. Beraldi's book. Basically, we can get an imbalanced stress signal to the heart. And if we get this, like the heart is supposed to have, like the whole body really is supposed to have this balanced nervous system signaling. So you have a stress signal and a non-stress signal. And people think we're in the stress or non-stress, but it's always both are supposed to be activated at the same time, but one maybe more than the other. And if we get an imbalanced signal to the heart, so if we get a more of a stress signal to the heart without the lesser surge of the non-stress signal, we can get a change in physiology. So think about it like this. If you're walking your dog and on a leash, and your dog sees your neighbor, and your dog wants to attack your neighbor, and so it has a stress response. It has this reaction, and it goes for the neighbor. That's fine. It's a stress response, but the leash is the non-stress response that's holding it back from becoming a catastrophic event, right? Where the dog attacks your neighbor and you get sued. So that's the same it is in the heart. We can have a stress signal, like the dog having a response, but if we have the leash, which is the non-stress response, it keeps everything in check. And so that's how it's supposed to be. However, that can get imbalanced. And when that get imbalanced, if we have a surge and a stress response, then what that does is it shifts the metabolism of the heart, which is a problem. The heart really likes to burn fatty acids and ketones. And if it's forced to burn more glucose, then it creates a situation where we get lactic acid buildup and hydrogen ion buildup, which is the same thing that happens if you go for a run and your muscle starts to burn. That's what angina is. If we feel burn in our chest, it's because our heart's burning more glucose than it needs to. And that can happen from oxygen restriction if we get lack of blood flow to an area, but it also happens from this imbalanced stress response signaling. And when that happens, that burn can become too intense. If we get too much of a stress signal, it doesn't stop. And that buildup of hydrogen ions and lactic acid creates a swelling in the heart tissue, in an area of the heart tissue. And that swelling increases the pressure out. And now blood can't get in because the pressure is greater coming out. And so when blood can't get in, we get tissue death. And in Beraldi's work, he did fascinating work where he looked at people who had heart attacks. And when he did the autopsy, the area of tissue death was completely different than the area where the blockage was, because something else killed that tissue. And then he theorized that it was this mechanism here. So I don't know what it was for me, because when they went in there, they found a blockage. They found 100% blockage of the LAD. But I have no idea if that was there before the heart attack or not. It could have been, and my body could have built collaterals around it, and it would have been a non-issue. I mean, that happens all the time in cardiology. They go in, they do a heart cath, and they find people with 80, 90, 100% blockages, and they have no heart symptoms whatsoever because there's collaterals. So that could have been there, and it could have been this other mechanism of a stress response. Then when they placed the stent, like they placed a stent and they gave me morphine around the same time. So I don't know if the morphine just made me feel better and not feel the pain, or if they placed the stent, opened up the blood flow, and then the symptoms went away, or if the morphine calmed the stress response that was happening, causing tissue death. I don't know. But regardless of which one it was, the answers to preventing it from happening again are the same. The things that create blood flow and prevent clotting are the same things that balance the autonomic nervous system signaling to the body and create coherence in the body. So I'm just going to do those things. 4 of those things I already mentioned about what I did. Those are the 4 main things that I did. Yeah, there's nuance here. I'll probably never know the exact mechanism, just like I don't think anybody knows the exact mechanism of who had a heart attack or when you have a heart attack, unless you can do an autopsy later. But there's nuance to this that medicine doesn't understand. And if you don't understand those mechanisms, how are you supposed to prevent it? You're basically just waiting for it to happen, and then you prevent it from someone from dying. Hopefully you do. And then you're just like, all right, and then here's the recipe. Here's the cookie cutter recipe of medications and things, which is exactly what I got in the hospital. And that is not going to prevent a future heart attack. It's just going to allow the processes that cause it in the first place to perpetuate, and you're just kind of masking the symptoms. It's not a direct answer to what caused mine, but that's the thing. So, and that's the thing too, is that prior to the heart attack, which is an important piece of information, I learned I got some very stressful news about a close family member of mine a day and a half before I had the heart attack. And it wasn't just the news. It was the inability of me and my family to do anything about it. We were just sitting around waiting, hoping this person was going to be okay. They were in a different country. We couldn't get to them. It was during COVID, so we couldn't go anywhere easily. So we were just waiting around. And then I spent the whole next day trying to figure out if I could get to this person. And then I woke up the next morning, Tuesday morning, and unwisely did a very intense workout, which is a stress response inducing thing, which is the workout that I did, and my leg was fine. So I know it wasn't, blocked before then. And then, 20 minutes later, I had a heart attack. So I think that the stress, I could make a case for the stress response part of it. I could make a case for the blockage part, because they found one there, and could have been an acute blockage, could have been something that's been there forever, or not forever, but for a long time. But yeah, I don't know.
Dr. Hussey, let's talk about the 4 things that you mentioned that you did that was helping you afterwards. So it was grounding, regular sun exposure, infrared sauna, and the supplements, correct?
Circadian rhythm.
Oh, the circadian rhythm. Okay. Now, how did you find this? Like, how did you know that this was going to be the solution?
Well, so like I said, I'd always been strict about diet and exercise. That was kind of how I controlled health. And so when this happened, I was like, okay, there's got to be something more, because I was doing those things to the best of my ability. So I started looking. Now, in the hospital, they were I like to say that much of what medicine does, intentionally or unintentionally, I don't know, is fear-based medicine. What they do is they say, if you don't do this, you're going to get this. That's this ultimatum, this fear. That's how they scare people into doing what they're doing, what they want them to do. And so in the hospital, they were like, you're going to develop heart failure. You have tissue damage in the septum of your heart. And I did. Fairly significant. It wasn't a large portion of the heart, but it was fairly significant damage in one portion of the heart. So they're like, you're heavily predisposed to heart failure. And at that point, I was very well aware of the research that infrared sauna is great for heart failure. And I understand that now, why. But so that's what I was like, that's why I originally started doing it, was because I don't want heart failure. So I got a sauna. And then I was like, and the sun is also infrared light. So I want sunlight too. that seems more natural. So I started doing those things because of that reason. And it wasn't until later that I figured out this whole connection between, I mean, I was aware of structured water at the time too, but now I have this complete understanding of atherosclerosis and structured water and infrared light and how it's vital to our artery health. And so over time, that's what I got to, was that. And then I realized that grounding was pretty much the same thing, because grounding is going to create charge to the body, which I can explain all this too, but like I just kind of slowly got, and then it just made sense to me, because I'm always somebody just like, I'm not just going to do what the literature says, because I understand the shortcomings of research, and it's human design and human, performed and everything. So there's flaws in it, and I don't think the answer is ever going to come from research. But the more and more I started learning about the things that were helping, I realized, well, this is just the natural environment of humans and all life on Earth. We're supposed to be outside in infrared light all day long, just like the rest of all life on the planet is. It's outside in infrared light all day long, and it's in contact with the Earth all day long. And humans have invented a way of life that deprives us of those things. We live indoors, and the surveys suggest that 93% of the time, humans are either inside or in an enclosed vehicle, the average human today. So, like, there's got to be something there. We've had this stimulus forever, and now we don't. So I started putting things together like that. And when you start looking into the literature too, there's actually literature that suggests that this is like, that we should know this. We should know this by now, and it makes logical sense. It makes sense historically for humans' environment. And so I just kept going down that rabbit hole. And then circadian rhythm is like, if you look at the effects of melatonin, which you optimize when you optimize your circadian rhythm, and the effects of melatonin on the artery and the healing of the artery and the promoting of optimal sleep and healing when you sleep, it's just like, oh, that's huge, because I knew that like blue light was disrupting circadian rhythm, but I didn't understand it to this level, especially to cardiovascular health. So as I set circadian rhythm, now I'm allowing my body to heal at night and many other things. But so that kind of combination of things, because the damage is going to happen if you can't heal at night when you sleep, then it just accumulates. It's like, I tell people, it's like you never took the trash out in your house. Eventually you can't live in your house anymore, like, because there's just so much trash in there and it smells horrible. So if you never clean out your house, your body's house, or you heal and repair and detox and stuff like that at night, then it just builds up over time. And one day we wake up and we're like, oh, I got a disease. Like, what happened?
So it's like you put this all together without really knowing about the whole field of quantum biology. Like you sort of stumbled into it on your own as you were doing your research. Is that how you
Yeah, I
got
was just chasing threads,
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I've always been that way, curious, and like, I had a really good, like, my first chiropractic job out of school was in Ireland, and I had a really good mentor, I should say. The guy that I worked with there, he was just like just handing me these books all the time. And so it just like, it broke down any filter I had. I would just read whatever he gave me. And at times I would be like, this is nuts. But then now I realized maybe it wasn't nuts. It was just beyond anything I can comprehend at that point. So I go back and read it. So it's just, I've always been that way. I just soak in the information regardless of what people think it should say or shouldn't say, or how crazy it seemed at the time, because I'll learn something else down the road and I'm like, oh, that wasn't so crazy. It makes sense now. And so, yeah, I don't pigeonhole myself. I'll just read anything or get information. And it doesn't mean I believe everything that I read. It just means that I get a lot of different perspectives.
And you're very good at connecting the dots, finding pieces of the puzzle and putting it all together. Which
Yeah,
is
people
just
tell
an
me that,
amazing
and I'm just like,
talent.
oh,
Yeah.
cool,
No, it's very
and
cool. The first podcast that I heard from you was with Meredith Oak from the Quantum Biology Collective. And you were talking about the heart not being a pump, the heart not pumping the blood. And when you started talking about, the heart being a vortex and all of that stuff, like my mind was literally blown. I think I had to go back and listen to that like 10 times over again. I'm like, what? Like, what is going on? But the way you describe it, it makes so much sense. And I can never look at our heart or our circulatory system the same way again. So tell us, please, a little bit more about this. The heart is not pumping the blood, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So this idea, it came from William Harvey back in the 1600s. He was a very prominent physician in England. He was like the king's personal physician. But he was the first one to describe the circulatory system. And he kind of figured out, okay, we have these arteries that that bring the blood to the tissues, and we have the veins that bring it back to the heart, and this is the circulatory system. They know that the heart is beating, it's contracting. So they assume, oh yeah, it must be pumping the blood, so to speak. But after that, there were many scientists throughout the 1800s and into the 1900s that were like, this is impossible. There's no way a heart this size could pump or create enough force of fluid to get throughout the entire body. There's just no way. And one scientist is like, we would need a heart the size of a whale to even create a slow movement of blood. So there must be other mechanisms by which the blood moves. And so, in school, we learn stuff like, oh yeah, the contraction of muscles moves the blood, and the one-way valves of the veins, they keep it from getting this backflow, so it keeps the blood moving in the right direction. If you look at like the place where there's like a swamp between the arteries and the veins, like in the capillaries, where it's just like the fluid just kind of going into the tissues, like the blood actually stops there, or the fluid actually stops. So like, how does it get moving again? And if we just think about it logically, like if I was going to get a pressure propulsion pump, which is a pump that sucks in fluid from somewhere else and forcefully pumps it out somewhere else. If I was going to pump water up a hill, I wouldn't put the pump at the top of the hill and let the water go down the hill and then try and pump it back up. Right. I would put it at the bottom of the hill and pump it up the hill. And so when we have blood in our toes, like it makes no sense that the pump that gets the fluid from our toes back up to our heart is here, not down there. So that doesn't make sense. But again, there was lots of different scientists. One of them, this guy, he was Dutch. His name is Leon. I don't know how to say his last name. I'm not even going to try to. But he did, like his whole career, he kind of did these experiments that showed that it was impossible to maintain perfusion pressure if you got a pressure propulsion pump and you like created a system, like a artificial system of what the vascular system looks like. With a pressure propulsion pump, it's impossible to keep the pressure. This other guy, this German guy named Weber, did the same thing, or Weber, I'm not sure how you say it. He did the same thing when he built like this artificial system, and he couldn't, with a pressure propulsion pump, make it work like our cardiovascular system works. Yeah, there was lots of doubt, but that was just the main thinking. It just kind of kept going, right? There's also, the blood also moves on its own, because people will think, well, if it's not a pump, and if you look at, there's studies like, there's a study from 2011, I think, where they looked at the efficiency of the heart tissue as far as how much energy it uses based on how much work it does as far as moving fluid. And if they look at it as a pressure propulsion pump, they say it's about 10 or 15 to 30% efficient, which is not very efficient. Whether you believe we are designed or created, like that's not an efficient way to evolve or create something. And so we must be looking at it the wrong way. And I think that we are. And so there are other mechanisms by which blood moves, and that is structured water in the arteries. So this has been proven in the lab of Dr. Gerald Pollack that blood can move without a contracting heart because of these mechanisms of what's called structured water, which is a gel-like form of water that most of our water in our body is supposed to be in this gel-like state, which is why I feel like a gel. Like if you poke me, it bounces back, Mm-hmm. But there is liquid water in the body too, including in the blood. And some of this water next to the artery wall can form structured water. And when structured water forms, without getting into like the details of how it forms and everything, it creates an energy gradient that does the work of moving fluid. And so they've done this over and over again in Dr. Pollack's lab. They even stopped the heart of a chick embryo, and they were able to keep the blood moving. But experiments like that were done in the 40s and in the 60s, where they stopped the heart of a dog, and the blood kept moving for up to 2 hours. Wow. Without the contracting heart. And they did various experiments because they thought, oh, maybe it was the ventilation of the lungs we were doing, or maybe it was this, or maybe it was that. But they kept doing it, and it still kept moving for about 2 hours. So the blood moves other ways, and it's the structured water that moves it. And so when you start to learn that, okay, it's impossible for it to act like a pressure propulsion pump, but the blood is moving on its own to an extent, then it sounds more like hydraulic ram. Which is something that people don't know what a hydraulic ram is. You can go YouTube it. I had to YouTube it. I didn't know what it was. And it's just it's a type of pump, quote unquote, that is flow activated. So things have to be flowing into it for it to activate. And so our heart's a little bit different than that because it's not flow activated. Like the contraction is not activated by flow. The contraction is an electrical signal from the brain, but the flow is happening regardless of if the heart is contracting or not. And so they've actually done studies where they artificially increase the heart rate, but the flow rate of the cardiac output stays the same. because the flow coming through is dictated by something else, not how fast the heart is contracting. So if you think if it's a pressure propulsion pump, the more it's contracting, the faster it's contracting, the more blood would flow through, and that's not the case. Matter of fact, they've done studies where they show that if the blood flow increases, the heart rate increases to keep up with the flow, not to create the flow.
Yeah.
And that's the same. Like if you go sit in the sun, which gets you infrared light, which builds structured water in your body, which creates blood flow, your heart rate will increase a little bit, and you're just sitting there. You're not doing anything, but it will. And it's slight, but it will increase because it's trying to keep up with the flow that's being created. The heart. So people will say, well, if it's not a pressure propulsion pump, why is the heart there? And the reason that it's there is because it's a vortex. The heart is a vortexing hydraulic ram. So its pumping mechanism, or its mechanism, is a hydraulic ram, which is very different than a pressure propulsion pump. But it's also one of its other uses, or one of its other like descriptors, is a vortex. Because if you look at this guy named Francisco Torrent Clasp, he discovered that the heart is actually one big band of muscle that's wrapped up on itself. So it's kind of spiral. So like when you realize that the conduction signal for the heart comes down to the heart, and then it goes through the muscle linearly. If that linear muscle is wrapped up on itself, it goes like this, like the signal. So it contracts like this, it spirals. So it's spinning. And so that's one way, like when the contraction happens and the blood is it is pushed a little bit by that contraction out of the ventricle, but it's not what's responsible for the blood flow out once it gets out of the heart. But with that contraction, when it spins it vortexes it, which is important because water, if we want it to become structured water when it gets next to the lining of the arteries, needs to be energized. It needs to be coherent. And one of the ways you create coherence in water is to vortex it. And that makes sense because that's what nature's doing to water. Water is always flowing over rocks and rivers. It's crashing on the beach. It's in tidal currents. It's evaporating, precipitating, like it's being swished around. And so if you could take fluid out of nature and you put it in a living thing and you put it in laminar tubes, it's not getting swished around. So we need a mechanism to do that. And that's what the heart is. It's this thing to keep blood coherent, the water in the blood coherent, so that it can move once it gets into the periphery. So in a way, you could say the heart is responsible for the movement of blood, just not in the way we thought. So it's this vortex. So the other thing is there's many other ways that the blood gets vortex as it's going through the heart. Like when it flows into the chambers of the heart, it flows in like you ever seen those things where you drop a quarter in and it goes around like this? Yeah. That's kind of how the blood flows into the heart. It goes around like that. So it vortexes, but also when it moves through a heart valve on either side, it eddies on either side. And they've shown this, like vortex dynamics, as the blood flows into the heart chambers. And that they've actually shown that optimal vortex formation of blood flow into the heart can dictate heart function, how well heart is functioning. So like when you have heart failure and the chambers expand and they're not in this like American football shaped thing, they're in more of this American basketball type thing, then, that's it's not vortexing as well. So that's one, I think, role of the heart, is to vortex blood. The second role is to actually stop the flow of blood during times of exertion, because if we go for a run, the tissue demand for oxygen and nutrients is so great that all the blood would flow over to the arterial side because of that demand, and we wouldn't maintain pressure in the venous side, and would collapse and we die. But we have a heart in there, and the heart's actually stopping the flow of blood during like times of exertion so that maintain the pressure between the two sides. And they've shown that too, like in endurance athletes, like the reason that the endurance athletes' hearts get like hypertrophied a little bit and the muscle's so strong is because it's more effective at stopping the flow of blood, because they're always exerting themselves, it seems. And that's why it gets bigger. It's not because it's pumping the blood more, because it doesn't do that. It's stopping the flow, but like the catcher's mitt is bigger, So that's another role of the heart. And then the third role of the heart is that it measures what's called coherence, because the heart gives off the biggest electromagnetic field of any organ in the body. I thought that I could never really explain why that was for a while, because the electromagnetic field of an organ is given to it, or it's provided by the mitochondria. And so your mitochondria create that electromagnetic field. And if you have high concentrations of mitochondria in an organ, then you're going to get a bigger electromagnetic field. But the brain, the heart, and the eyes have generally about the same amount of mitochondria. And the brain's a little bit bigger than the heart in most people. It depends on the person. But so why is the heart so much bigger? I always thought that to myself. And then I came across the answer. I read this book by Carl Moore. It's because the heart is vortexing. And we have plenty of evidence that shows that when you create a vortex or a spiral, or you twist something in an electromagnetic field, it amplifies the field significantly. So that's what's happening. So the eyes aren't doing that. Plus, the eyes are just smaller, but the brain's not vortexing. It's not spinning. But I've also seen evidence that an electromagnetic field that's big will also create a torsional force. So I don't know which one it is. Is it the electromagnetic field creating the torsion, or the torsion creating the field, or are they just coupled together and they're both relying on each other? I don't know. But that's why the heart's electromagnetic field is bigger. And so that's important because that's kind of our antenna. Like, we know that this thing sends out an electromagnetic field, and that can communicate to things around it, right? And so that's an antenna. It's searching for things, and that's our antenna. So it's how we reach out into our environment, and we sense other people, and we sense emotions, and we sense other life, and connect to the ether, or the plasma, or whatever you want to call it, but it's also picking up, or it's measuring our internal communication and how coherent our body is from a cell-to-cell communication perspective. And so that information is sensory information. Our heart is reaching out to an environment and sensing our internal environment and picking up the information it's receiving and getting a coherent or incoherent signal. And then that signal is relayed to the brain neurologically and electromagnetically. And the brain is sending that signal back to the body and through the nervous system. So that's where we get like sympathetic and parasympathetic signaling based on what the heart is receiving. Then that the brain is receiving that, and the brain's not changing anything. The brain's not in control. It's just receiving information and relaying that to the body. And so then that's relayed back down to the body. So if you want to change your autonomic balance, your sympathetic, parasympathetic, you want to change your environment, change your heart coherence by looking into your environment and seeing what things are influencing that, which could be many things. But that's what the heart's doing for us, at least what I've discovered so far. And it makes sense too. But like, if you look at all the ancient cultures, like they were like, the heart is the seat of the soul. Like we are heart-centered. We reach out, we lead a heart, put our heart forth, in the life and that kind of thing. And then it wasn't until like it really started, I guess, like ancient Rome, we started getting like a more heady, I'd say. Like we started getting more philosophical and logical and sciencey and that kind of stuff. And we started like living these head-centered lives. And I could argue that a lot of the problems we have in society today are because we're not living heart-centered, or we're not, like you get to the top these days because you're logical, you're smart, you're sciencey. And that's putting people at the top that aren't leading with their heart and doing what's best for humanity. You could argue that they're doing what's logical, and both of those things are important, but we've kind of lost the balance, I think. So I don't know how you're talking about that, but yeah.
So the way you're describing it, it's like the heart, it seems like the heart is like the center or the means by which we get intuitions. Like it's sending
I would say
us,
so.
Yeah.
But I'd also say that there are other organs that can do that too, like the gut. We have gut feelings about something.
Right.
We say things like that. But we attach emotions very specifically to the heart. Like I love you with all my heart hurts, that kind of stuff. We don't say my brain hurts unless we're trying to think too hard or something, but we attach the emotions with that. But then, I think, but the thing with the gut is that we say that some things about that with the gut, but the gut's basically an external environment inside our body, like the lumen of the gut is, because it's supposed to be sealed off. And so again, that's a sensory organ. It's sensing our external environment. So what you put in your mouth and what encounters your gut on the inside can give that signal as well, the signal of coherence or incoherence. But the heart gives off the biggest electromagnetic field. So it's the one that's really responsible for kind of sensing or monitoring all this stuff. Yeah.
So does the size of this electromagnetic field around the heart, does it change depending on how healthy the heart is?
That I don't know. And I don't know that anybody's looked at that, but I wish that they would. And so like, I don't know if they have at the Heart Math Institute looked at the electromagnetic field, the size of the field in someone with heart failure versus someone with a normal heart, or someone with even just like after they've had a heart attack or something. Does the field shrink? I don't know. I would imagine that it would, because if a vortex is what's amplifying the field and you get heart failure and you get this dilated cardiomyopathy where the heart is not vortexing as well, it's kind of contracting like this now, then I would suspect that it would, but I don't know. I do know that heart rate variability in people with heart failure and arrhythmias and things like that is significantly lower, but I don't know about the field.
Mhm.
So yeah.
So when you talk to cardiologists about this stuff, what do they say? How do they react to this information? Are they open to it? Do people listen to you when you're talking about these things, or are they just
Well, I don't get to talk to that many. Lots of them don't want to talk to me.
really
Um,
interesting?
uh, yeah, they're not treated, but I have talked to many, and I have met a lot of very cool ones. And I don't know that many of them are into like a lot of them, like the more open-minded ones, they're into like the low carb space, and
Yeah.
LDL doesn't cause heart disease, and they're on board with that, and they understand that the literature has been kind of hijacked when it comes to that. But they're not necessarily aware of like these more energetic or quantum aspects of cardiovascular health or structured water and those types of things. But there are a few that I know that are like Thomas Cabell and Michael Twyman and people like that. But I don't know I don't know all of them. So people ask
Yeah.
me all the time, like, do you have a recommendation? I was like, no, I don't know. I don't have like a list of cardiologists in my head, you know. I just come across a few. But they're very like Philip Avadia, he read my whole book and he was just like, yeah, I learned a ton. And he's a cardiothoracic surgeon. Yeah, so like he in my book he learned why when they perfuse the heart, like when they do a heart surgery, they take the blood and they reroute it while they
Mhm.
work on the heart. And he's like, when they do that, the pulse goes away. We never understood why that was, he said. It's because it's because when you do that, like you're using a pressure propulsion pump to perfuse the blood around. And when you do that, you take the pulse away because now there's no change in pressure. You're just moving the blood through it.
Uh-huh.
Whereas when the way the heart works, hydraulic ram, it works on pressure buildup. If you go like YouTube how a hydraulic ram works, it works when pressure builds up, and then when a valve opens, the pressure is released. And when that pressure is released, you get this pulse throughout the entire thing. And if you don't do that, so the example I give in my books, people understand that is like I used to study in this room in college, and in the room there was windows on either side with blinds on them, and there was a door on either side. And like this door, the both doors would be closed, but there would be pressure higher outside the room. So someone would come into the room, and the pressure would go across, and the blinds on the other side of the room would shake. So it's that
Yeah.
kind of thing. When the valves open in the heart, that pressure goes, and it goes throughout the entire, all the way down to my hand and my feet. Like you can feel it all the way down there. And so if you take the blood away from that and you perfuse it around the heart, now you're not getting those pressure changes. You're just getting this pressure propulsion pump that's trying to forcefully pump it around, which I don't know, but I would imagine that the longer someone's in surgery, the issue they're going to have, because like they can't maintain that with a pressure propulsion pump, which is what those scientists in the 1800s, they figured it out. They tried to build models of our cardiovascular system with a pressure propulsion pump and they couldn't do it. It wouldn't work. So I imagine you can only keep someone in that situation for a certain amount of time, not just because of tissue death, but because of maintaining blood flow. So
Absolutely
Oh, it's
amazing.
a lot of people are very concerned, especially when they reach a certain age about, their heart health. And so, they go to the doctor and they get these lab requisitions with these tests that are supposed to give them some indicator of whether they've got a risk for heart disease. So, are any of those of any value?
Well, we
most
know
of them
about
know.
cholesterol, right? We know
Right,
every
Most of them
cholesterol.
know.
cholesterol.
Yeah, so I don't think that knowing what your LDL levels or your total cholesterol is or your ApoB or your small dense particle, I don't think any of that is really that helpful because those numbers don't determine risk. And really, no number on a blood test determines your risk. Technically, you could look at literature and you can say, yes, if this insulin is higher, you're at higher risk. But like what really determines your risk is what you do from that point on, like how you change your environment from that point on that day. Like because like if we had two people that had a fasting insulin of 20, which is too high, and one of those people just kept doing what they were doing, they kept it at 20, and the other person completely changed their life, like they're completely different risks, but at that moment in time, their levels are still 20, right? And so it doesn't really determine risk. So people like slave over their blood work and they're like, oh my gosh, I have to change these numbers, but changing the numbers doesn't always equal less risk. Now, if your fasting insulin goes down, that's a good thing. If your inflammatory markers go down, that's a good thing. But that's like if your inflammatory markers are normal, which mine were, what determined my risk? Was it the inflammatory markers? No. Was it the CAC score of 0, which said very low risk? No. What determined my risk was my environment. So I know people don't want to hear that. They want to see these numbers and they want to say, yes, look, I'm fine. I don't have to do anything. When in reality, what really tells you if you're fine or not is how you feel personally, but also the environment you put your body in every single day. And that's what I help teach people these days, because we're very confused with what that environment is. And there's many aspects of our modern way of life are not compatible with our physiology and creating this risk that we seem to have be so prevalent for, because we're like the sickest people in the world, in the Western world. So, but so like people oftentimes, a lot of people anyways, like when I completely dismiss this lipid panel, like, you can't do that. It's relevant. It's got to be relevant at some point. I'm just like, no, I don't think it is at all. Like like as far as risk of disease, it's relevant if it wants to tell us about metabolism. If you're burning more fats versus more carbohydrates, your lipids could change. If you have some inflammation in the body, so you have damaged particles or small dense particles, or your trigs are too high, like it can give us a sense of those things, but it's not really telling us risk. What tells us risk is what we're doing day in and day out and the signals we're giving our body. Now, people say, well, what about clotting markers? You talk about how clotting is this big risk factor for heart disease and everything. It's like, yeah, you could take a ESR or a prothrombin or a whatever, platelets. You could take all these kinds of things. But again, that's just one snapshot in time of one tissue in your blood. Like as soon as you walk out of the lab with EMF and artificial light and no contact with the earth, you walk out of the lab into the sunset, your markers look completely different within 5 minutes, I'm sure. People say, well, my cholesterol is this marker is this. I say, it was that at one point in time. It's probably changed 1 million times since you took that test. And so if you want to keep those things normal, you change your environment. It's kind of like, it's frustrating for some people because they want the things to tell them that they're okay, but it should be empowering, because now you have complete control over if it's going to be okay, because you can control your environment, or most of us can to an extent. So you can always change things. So that's way different. We kind of started this off with like fear-based medicine. You have to do this or this is going to happen. Whereas what I want to teach people is, hey, you can do this. This is your game plan. This is your action plan forward. You don't have to just take this medication and sit and wait and hope that you get better. You can actually do things to help you get better, which is empowering, and it gives you back control. It takes away your fear, and fear is just going to make the whole situation worse. So that's the path forward for medicine. It should be anyways. For me, is that we've got to empower people to let them know they can make changes. And some of them won't, but you got to tell them, because if you start making excuses before they make excuses, then they're never going to change.
People want an easy fix. They just want a pill. They want to take that pill and they want to be okay. Like, I think that's a lot easier for most people than making actual lifestyle changes. That's what I'm finding with a lot of people. Dr. Hussey, do you find what is more important? Lifestyle changes in general, like your environment, light, all of those things, or diet? Because we've always been so focused on diet and exercise that those are the two things for optimal health, for heart health, for everything, diet and exercise. And then this new revolutionary world of quantum biology has entered our lives. And now we are seeing that there's this other part that is equally important, or if not more important, because I think that would be the foundation to everything. So where would you start? If somebody came to see you and I said, okay, I'm very concerned about my heart health, where do we start?
Yeah. Well, lots of my clients, like previously I've been doing like one-on-one consulting, but I'm moving to more like program group coaching now. But previously with my clients, I'd get to the end of the hour and they're like, you didn't say anything about diet. I'm like, oh yeah, because I don't think it's the most important thing. It's obviously very important as far as like, don't eat a processed food diet. Make sure your food is free of toxins, and as whole food as possible. That is really, really important. But those are like my only really general rules. Like, stay away from grains, sugars, vegetable oils, and eat whole foods. I don't think we need to be dogmatic about eating just animals or just plants or whatever it is. Like, eat whole foods. I have my particular things that I eat, and it works for me. I don't think that just eating a good diet is going to protect you from disease, or eating a terrible diet is going to cause a whole disease process. It's very multifactorial. No disease is caused by just one thing. It's always a combination of things, and a combination of how our genes express themselves in the face of those signals that we're giving it. I obviously have a personal story of, eating a good diet and exercising and stuff, and it wasn't enough. and the things that I did after that were powerful enough to reverse disease in my body. So, and the things I did after that were not diet related. My diet stayed the same. My exercise stayed somewhat the same as soon as I could get back to, I just had to do a different form of it. And my stress stayed the same, maybe even got worse, unfortunately, at times after the heart attack. What I changed was my light and my circadian rhythm and my infrared light exposure and my grounding and that kind of stuff was what I changed more. And I didn't even really do much like mindfulness type stuff. That stuff all just stayed the same for me too. I didn't like ramp that up or anything. I think that's important too, very important. But I didn't do much change with that either. It just kind of shows the power of light and energy and that kind of stuff.
Can you speak a little bit on the whole issue of why heart attacks are more common in men than in women?
Yeah, it's a common question and that I get, and they still are more common in men than in women, but women are catching up. And so historically, I think, I don't know, but for sure, but what I can speculate is that men were the breadwinners, men were going to work, they were working these jobs and stuff. And now, like, especially like in the 80s, women started coming into the workplace way more. So that's why I think women are catching up because we're working these jobs, I think, that are just not great for us, these kind of industrial corporate type jobs. And I think that that's a stressful thing. So I think that could be one reason. But the other reason I think is that if we understand like that a large percentage of, I think a much larger percentage of heart attacks happen because of this imbalanced nervous system that we talked about. And so things that can increase the parasympathetic signaling. I think overall women are just a little bit more in touch with that kind of side of things, whereas men are just kind of like go through it, don't pay attention to it, just kind of just get through it or whatever. But also, at least, and actually, I don't know the studies. Oh, I think I did mention in my book. I haven't gone through this section in my book in a long time, but women also have a menstrual cycle, which is very parasympathetic stimulating, and they have that every month until a certain age. And I do think that, I can't remember, so don't quote me on this, but I do think that I had some evidence that I talked about in my book that after menopause, women catch up pretty quick.
Yes, and that is
so
That's true.
yeah. So that could be part of it. I mean, there could be many different reasons. Heart attacks are also more common in winter. All diseases get worse in the winter.
Monday mornings, right?
And Monday mornings. Yeah, we all know this. Like, well, most people know this. The medical field definitely knows it. Monday mornings, stressful sporting events, stressful holidays, daylight savings, like heart attacks are way more common. What does that create? Stress. So if someone's already imbalanced in their stress and we get this acute stress, like I really think that heart attacks are more like these stress forms of heart attacks are probably more prevalent than we think. And just like in my case, what happens in cardiology, someone has a heart attack and then they go in and they find all these blockages that could have been there for years, not causing an issue because the body built collaterals, and they say, oh, this was the cause. This is it. When really it was something else completely. And there's no real way to tell if where the blockage was correlates with where the tissue death was. Because until that person, we can do an autopsy on that person and study their arteries, we don't know. Because, some people are right coronary dominant, some people are left coronary dominant. And in Beraldi's work, like his work is fascinating. He's a very, very meticulous documenter, and he found that it's random. Everybody's so different. Like in some people, the right coronary artery supplied more blood to the heart than the LAD. And it wasn't just some people, it was like a large percentage of people. So everybody's distribution to the heart as far as blood is different. So we can't really tell if we can correlate it until the person dies and we do an autopsy, which they don't even look at that, I bet. But so anyways, yeah.
How interesting. Dr. Hussey, can you tell us a little bit about your book and why you wrote the book and how it can help people?
Yeah. So I actually started writing the book before my heart attack. I hadn't finished it though, because I was interested in the heart, obviously. And then I had doubts about publishing it afterwards. I finished it after the heart attack and everything and had doubts about publishing it. But I got to add a lot about my story and everything and to it, which I think made it better. And, I went through it and I was like, well, would there be anything I changed now that I've had this experience? And there's not. Like everything that I said, I still feel is true. And now I could add so much more to my book. I feel like, and I hope I get the chance to do so. But it's still good. I thought it's still very, very valuable, and there's lots of interesting things about the heart not being a pump and the structure of the water in the arteries. I still go through all that in the book. But yeah, I mean, it's my thoughts on heart disease,
What's the
things
title
that
of the book?
it's called Understanding the Heart, which again is what I've been trying to do. I've been trying to understand health and disease for a very long time, but specifically the heart. So understanding the heart, which when you see it, people see that and they're like, I had somebody reach out to me and say that he ordered my book and his wife opened the package when it came in and she was like, "You got a book about understanding the heart." Oh, and he was like, "No, no, no, it's heart disease. It's heart disease. It's not," which is a component of heart disease, the whole
Yeah,
emotional part of
sure.
it. But like,
absolutely.
Yes.
it was funny. So I thought that was funny. But yeah, yeah, it's on Amazon and it's on the publisher's website, which is Chelsea Green Publishing. People can find it there.
I'll make sure to link it below. Dr. Hussey, thank you so much for giving
Oh,
us
can I get one more question
no
in?
more
Sorry,
questions for
just
you.
one-
Okay, go ahead, Lucia.
I have to
Go
get my
ahead.
psychiatric question in, right?
Okay,
Because
go ahead.
of the high correlation between depression post cardiac event and even after bypass surgery. So it's estimated that upwards of 30 to 40% of people who go through those experiences develop depression. So do you have an idea of why that happens?
I would argue that, well, I don't know, I don't have any, concrete data on this, but I would argue that perhaps the mechanism by which depression would develop, which is rewiring of the brain, in my opinion, has started well before the heart disease. That was one component that caused the heart disease, potentially, and especially heart failure. But yeah, especially if they're like when your body fails you, like it's hard to go through. I've been there. So I think that can contribute and perpetuate the process. But I do think it's a chicken or the egg type of thing, because if someone, there's a huge correlation between all disease and mental illness and anxiety, depression, those types of things, because the brain is starting to wire itself in a certain way. And now, even if there's no stressful thing or depressing thing happening around us or painful thing happening around us, our brain is wired in a way to activate that, which is one of the curses of the prefrontal cortex that we have that's so large, because we can think our way into stress responses and we can wire that system. I wrote a book about chronic pain, and I think trauma and depression and pain rewire the brain in similar ways. And so I think that any disease, there's a component of brain rewiring that has to happen. And unfortunately, many aspects of our modern way of life interfere with that, especially disrupted circadian rhythm. If you're not sleeping, you're not healing your brain, you're not rewiring your brain. People know about I think it's EDMR, EMDR, like training with the eyes.
That's
and
what I
doing that,
do. That's what I do.
yeah,
That's my modality.
what do we do in deep REM sleep? Our eyes move. Like
Right,
that's
eyes
what's
move.
supposed to happen. And if we disrupt that, we never get into that, then our brains don't rewire. So yeah, I think that it goes hand in hand, especially since the connection between the brain and the heart, and how there's this heart-brain kind of coherent system that's kind of the brain's picking up the signal, or the heart's picking up the signals, the brain's relaying it to the body. So we want the brain wired in a certain way. So there's no mistake that, or it's not a coincidence that I think like it's somewhere between 50 and 75% of people who have chronic pain or chronic disease of any sort have anxiety and depression. Like it's totally linked, because I think that it's chicken and the egg. One's causing the other, or it's kind of like the electromagnetic field and the vortex. It's happening, and they're both happening at the same time. So really, really important to bring up. Yeah.
I think you have a photographic memory, correct? You see something or you hear something once, you remember it, right?
Me?
Yes.
I don't know.
I don't know.
It's just if I'm looking for an answer and I find it, I'll remember it. Because I always think about that. Like, how many books have I read where what I read wasn't pertinent to what I was thinking about at the time, and I missed the information. Now I got to go back and read them again.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah.
For sure. Dr. Hussey, we know you have to run, so please tell our listeners where they can find you, where they can get more information. I know you've got the Instagram page, X, and Facebook, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just Dr. Stephen Hussey, Dr. Stephen Hussey. People can reach out to me on there. And then my website is resourceyourhealth.com. And, my heart health program is on there. People can get into that, or my books are on there. My blog that I infrequently post on is on there. My recommended products, everything's on the website. So
Okay, great. I will make sure to link everything below so they can find you easily. Thank you so much for your time. We learned so much today.
Thank you. Always fascinating to listen to your knowledge. I love it.
Absolutely. It was an honor.
yeah, thanks
Thank you
guys.
very
Thanks for
much.
having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Take care,
you.
everyone. See you guys in the next one.
Thank you for tuning into the Rewilded Human Podcast. We hope you're leaving with insights to reconnect with your natural, vibrant self. Remember, the information shared here is for educational and inspirational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare provider for any personal health concerns. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might benefit. We'll see you next time, ready to dive even deeper. Stay wild, stay true, and stay tuned.